Welcome to The Stranger Truth, where we dive into the unsolved mysteries of the world. In 1872, a mysterious ship was found, floating off the Azores Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. The ship, the Mary Celeste, had sailed from New York to Genoa, Italy, 4 months earlier with a cargo of industrial alcohol. But somehow the ship had traveled all the way across the Atlantic without a crew. And when it finally reached port, nobody was there to meet it because its crew had vanished without a trace. It's one of the sea's greatest mysteries, but what actually happened to the Mary Celeste? Let's find out. On November 1871, the captain of the Mary Celeste, Benjamin Briggs, set sail from New York for the port of Genoa in Italy. Briggs was an experienced sailor who'd been at sea since he was 13. He captained many ships during his career and had no reason to believe that this voyage would be anything but routine. However, the Mary Celeste wasn't just any ship. She was carrying a valuable cargo of industrial alcohol, which was highly taxed. In fact, the entire crew probably stood to make more money from this one voyage than they made in an entire year of normal work. But when the ship reached the halfway point of its journey, things started to go wrong. On December, the ship began to experience violent storms. Huge waves that tossed the Mary Celeste around like a toy boat in a bathtub.
Ow.
Even though the ship had been built to withstand almost any conditions the Atlantic could throw at it. The constant battering took its toll, and several planks of wood came loose. By December, the weather began to calm down, and the Mary Celeste was able to continue its journey. Aboard the ship was not only Captain Briggs, but his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter, Master Anna. There were also 8 other crew members on board, including the first mate, Thomas Nickerson. They had plenty of food and water for the rest of the journey, and there was nothing to suggest that the ship would have any trouble making it to port. However, something very strange happened. The captain decided to abandon ship. Well, not really, see. The logs kept by both the captain and the ship's clerk show no indication that anyone ever left the vessel voluntarily. In fact, the last entry in the ship's log is dated December. It simply says fine and cloudy, winds variable. This suggests that there was nothing wrong and that the ship was still on course for Genoa. However, exactly 3 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, 1871, the Mary Celeste was sighted by the captain of another ship named the Captain, who thought he saw smoke rising from the chimney of the Mary Celeste. So he assumed that the ship was occupied and continued on his way. But 4 days later, the captain of another ship spotted the Mary Celeste again. This time he was much closer, and he noticed that there was no smoke rising from her chimney. As he got closer still, he noticed that the sails were set, but there was no sign of any crew. At first he assumed that everyone was on the deck, so he hailed the ship and shouted to them, "How do you do? What is your name?" But his shout went unanswered. The captain kept getting closer and closer, but still there was no reply. Eventually, he realized that there was no one on deck and no one below deck either. The Mary Celeste was completely deserted. He searched everywhere but couldn't find a single person. He even looked in the captain's cabin and saw that his wife's knitting was sitting on the table as if she'd just gotten up to get something. The captain of the rescuing ship then checked the ship's log and discovered that the crew had last been seen almost a month ago. He also checked the ship's papers and found that the Mary Celeste was supposed to be carrying 7 men in total. 8, if you include the captain. But where were they? Had they all fallen into the ocean and drowned? Or had they abandoned ship? As soon as the ship arrived in port, newspapers from around the world picked up the story. Headlines screamed about the ghost ship that had traveled hundreds of miles with no one at the helm. People were fascinated by the idea of a ghost ship and speculated that supernatural forces must have driven the crew mad, causing them to flee the vessel. Others believed that pirates had attacked and killed everyone on board. Still, others thought that the ship had been cursed. But as the years went on, the mystery of the Mary Celeste gradually faded from the public consciousness. No one knows what really happened to the ship's crew, but there are a few theories. One theory is that the crew didn't actually vanish. Instead, they may have been taken off the ship by pirates. But if this were true, why was the ship still in good condition when it was found? If pirates had boarded the ship, they would have likely damaged it. Not to mention, they would have also stolen the valuables on board. The theory that pirates attacked the ship is therefore unlikely. Another theory is that the crew fled the ship after discovering that it was doomed. Perhaps the ship sprung a leak or a fire broke out below deck. Either of these situations would put the crew's lives in danger, so they would have no choice but to leave the ship and try to save themselves. However, there's no evidence that the ship was damaged when it was found, and no lifeboats were reported in the area. Moreover, if the crew had managed to launch one of the ship's boats and escape, they would have left the boat behind when they fled. But the boats were still in place. There are many other theories as well. Some people believe that a giant wave struck the ship, knocking everyone unconscious, and then dragging them into the sea. Others believe that the crew became the victims of a deadly disease, and yet others believe that they were taken off the ship by aliens. When the Mary Celeste was found, it was turned over to the nearest port authorities, who sold it to the captain of the ship that had found it. That ship then took the Mary Celeste back to New York under tow. But unfortunately, the ghost ship never made it. A few days into the journey, storm caused the Talene to snap, and the Mary Celeste disappeared beneath the waves once again. Thank you for watching another episode of The Stranger Truth. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.